All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of our Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Amanda, and I'm coming to you live from the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. And right now I'm standing in front of, well, it looks like I'm standing in front of our Blue Cavern exhibit. I'm actually standing in our studio, and the person who's making it look like I have Blue Cavern behind me is my friend Stacy, who's behind the computer controlling all this beautiful things you're going to see on the screen. I also am joined by Alicia, who is at the computer, who's ready to respond to any text questions that you text in to us or any observations that you'd like to share as we learn more about the sea otter together today. So if you would like to participate and include any questions and observations that you're making as we look at these really interesting animals, please text us at the number that you see on your screen right here, 562-286-1838, and we would love to include that as part of our program so you can participate along with us. Now, if you're at home and you don't have permission to necessarily text, because please make sure you have your parents' permission to text before doing so, but you can also share with anyone else in the room. If you make observations that you'd like to share, you can shout it out to the screen, talk to someone in the room with you. Anyway, we just want to make sure that you're engaged and having someone to share your discoveries with. But of course, we'd love to hear from you too. So let's look at the sea otter. So what is a sea otter? Let's give you a picture to look at and tell me what you notice about this animal. So obviously it's an animal. When scientists look at living things, they classify them. And this is part of the animal kingdom. It's obviously not a plant. But then when you look at animals in the animal kingdom, scientists then break them down into different categories and different groups based on things that they have in common, physical characteristics that they notice that certain creatures will share. So what kinds of characteristics do you notice about this animal here? How would you classify this? Into what type of group of animal is a sea otter? Now, keep in mind, this is a sea otter. There are other types of otters out there. So we are focusing on a sea otter, which means that this is one that lives in the sea. Also, an animal that lives in a sea is what we call marine. A marine animal would be one that lives in or around the ocean. So this cute little picture of the sea otter here, you get a nice view of the whole body, is one that lives in or around the ocean. There are otters who live in freshwater, though. There are river otters that are very common all across the U.S., but these otters are found in different areas. They're only found in the ocean on the west coast along the eastern Pacific. They're found in California. They can be found as far north as Alaska, and then there's even some on the western side of the Pacific Ocean. But that is where you find sea otters. The other otters are freshwater. So now looking at this otter, what kind of animal do you think it is? Well, it's clearly not a fish. It's not an amphibian. It's not a reptile. It is a mammal. Now, one of the main giveaways to let you know that this is a mammal is all of that hair all over its body, right? When we often think of mammals, we think of maybe dogs or bears and things with lots of fur, lots of hair. Well, this is no exception. The sea otter has one very special characteristic with this fur, is that it is the densest fur of any animal in the animal kingdom. It is probably the hairiest animal on Earth. Now, why would I say that? Well, first of all, you can look at it and you can tell just by looking that it looks pretty thick, that they've got a lot of hair. But do you have any idea how much hair they have? Now, let me give you something to think about. The hair on your own head. A human head has about 100,000 hairs all over your entire head. That's an awful lot of hair. Now, it can change from person to person, but an average is about 100,000. Well, a sea otter can have up to 1 million, which would be like 10 human heads, but I don't mean all over its entire body. I'm talking about the space the size of a quarter, or about the OK symbol. That much hair, 7, 10 human heads squeezed if you were to shave them, and I don't know, these days, a lot of people, I think, because they can't go out and get haircuts, a lot of people are tempted to just shave all the hair off their head. And if they did that and they squeezed it all into a space that big and joined it with 9 other people who did the same thing, that's how much hair is in 1 square inch of a sea otter's body. Would you be interested in taking a closer look at it? I actually have something at my document camera. We have a sea otter pelt. It is not from one of our animals here. This is on loan to us for educational purposes, but this is the hair of a sea otter. And if I kind of separate it here with my fingers, you can see it is pretty dense. It's very dark, but it is a little bit lighter down at the bottom. But it's hard as you even just move your fingers through here. It's hard to even see down to the bottom, really even see the skin. And that's because this hair is so thick, because it's so densely packed, that it does a very important thing for the otter. Now, we said that they're mammals, or did we say that? They are mammals, like you and I. Yes, we did say that. And mammals have hair. And another characteristic of being a mammal is that they're warm-blooded. They have a constant body temperature. Now, if you have a constant body temperature and you're living in a very cold environment, you need to find a way to keep your body warm. Well, sea otters have a special way of keeping themselves warm with that fur, and it's so important for them because they don't have another characteristic that many other marine mammals have, and that's blubber. So whales, dolphins, seals, and sea lions, they all have blubber to help keep them warm. So that's that layer of fat. So that's one of the reasons why these cute seals also look pretty cute, is because they look so round and pudgy because of all this blubber that's underneath their skin and underneath that fur. But they are mammals, they have hair too, but the hair on a seal is much, much shorter, much finer, and would not do a very good job of keeping them warm. So they rely on that blubber. Sea otters don't have blubber, they rely on their hair. And the way that that hair works is because it is so dense, it will actually trap air in their hair and create a layer all around them. You might even see sea otters even blowing into their fur to create little air pockets, and then they move it all around their body. They spend a lot of their life, a lot of their time during the day grooming and making sure that they've got lots of air, that their hair is clean and there's space for air, because when they go diving under the water, their skin doesn't even get wet. Can you imagine going into a swimming pool and you get wet, right? Your hair gets wet. And your head, your scalp, it gets wet. But could you imagine if you had so much hair covering your entire body that the water never even reached your skin? Well, that is how sea otters are able to stay so warm in those really, really cold temperatures. All right, we have some questions coming in. So as you're looking at this otter, and you can continue to make some observations and look for clues about what other things the scientists might think would be really special about this otter, why they would categorize it as a mammal. But Riley wants to know, how long do they live? Now, sea otters can live out in their natural habitat, out in the ocean. They might live 15 years, somewhere around there, 10, 15 years. But we actually had an otter here at the aquarium who lived long past that. We had an otter that lived 22 years. Charlie was the oldest living animal. This is Charlie right here, under human care. And it's really neat to be able to take care of an animal like this and allow it to get to such an old age, because this animal did get lots of good health care here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, and all the staff that worked with him really enjoyed it. But this is Charlie, our southern sea otter. And got to be 22 years old, but that's really old for a sea otter. Usually they're a little bit younger than that if out in the ocean. And then Riley also wants to know, why do they have long whiskers? I'm so glad that you noticed that. Did anyone else notice that? Look at this picture. It's a great example. Look at those long whiskers. Well, think about other animals that have whiskers. Maybe you have a pet cat at home. The whiskers on a cat also help them to sense things. They're very sensitive, and they are sensitive to touch. It's one of the ways that they can feel, even if they're not touching something with their paw, they can feel what's around them with their whiskers. Well, the whiskers, or what we call vibrissae of a sea otter, are even more sensitive. They're 15 times or 100 times more sensitive than a cat's whiskers. I don't remember what the actual number is, but they're very, very sensitive to help them find things in the ocean, in the dark, and when they're looking for their food. So that might give you a hint as to what types of food they might need to eat. But they do use those whiskers to help them find things because of the sensitivity that they have. Do we have sea otters in Long Beach? And someone said they are in San Diego, so they were curious about it. Well, that's a good question, and I wish I could say, we see sea otters all the time, because I think that would be fun to see. But we typically don't see sea otters this far south in our area. There have been a couple occasions where a sea otter has been spotted off the Palos Verdes Peninsula, just north of here and in our area. But typically they live a little bit further north. So Santa Barbara up to like Central California, Northern California. Santa Barbara is usually about the furthest south they go, but occasionally they'll wander and they'll check some things out. And it tends to be the males that will wander beyond what those normal boundaries are. And then the female sea otters stay kind of in the middle of their range with the sea otter pups. So good question. Thanks for asking. I wish we saw them a lot here, but I've never seen them with my own eyes here in our waters. I had to go a little bit further north up to Monterey to see some sea otters out in the ocean. Okay, so as we're looking at their body, we talked about their fur. We noticed their whiskers, their vibrissae. Now, what are some other mammal characteristics? They have hair. They're warm-blooded. Also, what do mammals breathe? Well, they breathe air, of course, and they breathe it with lungs. Well, that means with this animal being a marine mammal that lives in or around the ocean, whose food is in the ocean, it needs to do a lot of diving and spends a lot of time in the water, which means they have to hold their breath. So you can see that beautiful nose. They have a nice big nose and a good sense of smell, the sea otter. But when they go diving, how long do you think they can hold their breath? Well, they have to find things living on the bottom of the ocean. So it actually depends on what type of sea otter you're talking about. So there are 3 subspecies of sea otters. We're talking about the Southern California otter, which is the southern otter that we have here in Southern California. This is what you're looking at in this picture. There's also a northern sea otter, or the Alaskan sea otter, which is further north. And then there's also another sea otter out on the western side of the Pacific that we were talking about. They're all sea otters, but just different subspecies. Oh, and Jasmine had asked that question, so I hope that answers your question. So 1 sea otter species, but 3 subspecies of that same animal. All right, so there are some up in the northern area, up near Alaska, that will actually feed on fish. The ones around here that we're most familiar with feed on invertebrates, which generally live on the bottom of the ocean. So they have to hold their breath to go down there and grab their food. But what's really interesting is that they don't feed on their food down under the water. They bring it up to the surface. What do you know about how sea otters eat? It's actually really interesting. But to go down, believe it or not, they don't hold their breath for very long. They only hold their breath for about a minute. So their dives are usually only a minute long. They can hold their breath for like 5 minutes. Some species maybe as long as 8 minutes. But once they go down, they grab their food and they bring it up, they eat it up at the top, floating on their backs. So sea otters are known for floating on their backs and creating this little table, basically a tummy table, where they can eat their food. So they have to go down and then bring it up and eat it. But what do they eat? What does it look like this one's eating? It's kind of hard to tell. It looks like this white thing with some little pieces maybe coming off of it. Could be a crab. That's one of the favorite items that sea otters like to eat. But there are other things they like to eat as well. Could be sea stars. Could be clam. Now think about a clam. A clam is an animal that has 2 hard shells. The animal, the meaty part, is on the inside. So the otter has to be able to crack it open. They also like to eat shrimp. So you might see them eating some shrimp. I think we've got some good pictures of that. Here's one of our otters. This is a behind the scenes picture of one of our otters, one of our young ones. It still has a really dark face. Do you notice that? So it tends to be as otters get older, they do tend to get more gray hair or that silvery face that you see. But not all otters age the same way. But this is a cute picture of that whitened face. But watch this otter as it eats the shrimp. What do you notice about it? So this is some shrimp. And notice shrimp have that exoskeleton, that hard part, and when we eat it, we have to take it off, right? You want to eat the stuff on the inside. What do you notice the sea otter doing? When it's getting its food, is it eating it with the shell on, or is it taking the shell off too? Well, I noticed that at the beginning, it was actually taking the shrimp. And notice it takes the tail first. It's actually taking the outer covering off that tail area, spits that out, and then eats the rest, and then throws out that outer covering. So watch how it's doing that. Oh, there's that outer shell right here, stuck on it. It's like, oh, any meat left in there? Nope. They're fun to watch. So again, they actually shell their food, even their shrimp, before they eat it. But look at that hairy body. There's a nice close-up view of how thick all of that fur is that sea otter is using to keep it warm. Ah, how can you not just think that is one of the cutest animals in the world with all of that hair? All right, so it's eating shrimp. We saw that it can eat crab. Again, these are hard-shelled things that they need to break open. Well, how would you break open a clam shell? Any idea? Well, sea otters are actually one of the few species of mammals that uses tools. Actually, a few species, period. There aren't very many. So it will use tools like a rock, grab its food that might be on the bottom, and maybe it's even something prickly like a sea urchin. So sea urchins are a favorite food of sea otters, and what they'll do is they will take a rock and they'll even use that to help grab the urchin, because the urchin can hang on with these long feet between their long skinny spines, and they'll use that to get it off, to detach it from whatever rock it might be stuck to or wherever it is, and then bring it up to the surface. But how do they bring that up? Now, Jess also wants to know, what do they normally eat? So it varies on their location and what's available. So this is one of the favorite foods. This is a sea urchin. You can see their long spines and their long tube feet. So those little hair-like things that are sticking up are the tube feet that they use to stick onto things. And their spines at the top are a lot longer than the spines at the bottom. So they're a little bit flatter on the bottom. And as these animals move and hang on, if the sea otter can get underneath it, they can pull that up. But how are they going to pull it up? Did it look like those paws were really great for picking things up? Well, we can't really see it in this picture, but they do have paws. They can use them. They're actually very good. We saw how the sea otter was using them to help take that outer shell off that shrimp when it was eating, but they'll also use those paws to grab it. But now you've got a sea urchin and you've got your rock, your tool that you might still need to use to crack it open a little bit. Well, sea otters have a very special way of getting that food from the bottom up to the top and carrying everything with them. It's basically like they have shopping bags in their armpits. So they have all that hair, all that fur on their body. They have so much loose and extra skin and fur that they create like little pockets underneath their arms. And so they can grab their food and stick it in their little underarm pocket and swim up to the surface, where they can then crack it open and eat it floating on their back, just like in that video that we saw. So really interesting way of eating. Now, there are some other questions that have come in. And Cora and Ride want to know, do we have sea otters at the Aquarium of the Pacific? And yes, we do. The ones we have are southern otters, and they all came from, they were all rescued. So they were all otters that were orphaned or abandoned as pups. And then the aquarium said, we will take them in and we will help care for them, because they were deemed unreleasable, because these animals, whether they became too dependent on people or they had other physical limitations that wouldn't allow them to survive out in the ocean in their natural habitat, we have staff here at the aquarium who have been working with them and training them, and they are living in our exhibits happily now. So we have 5 sea otters here. We have Chloe, Maggie, Betty, Ollie, and Millie. Chloe, is that right? Yeah, that's right. And so we have those in our Northern Pacific gallery. Oh, Raiden. I'm sorry. Cora and Raiden? Okay. Thank you for that question. So hopefully you'll get a chance to sometime come to the aquarium and get to see our otters. Fisher and Maverick say, how many do we have at the aquarium? And that again is 5. And are they endangered? And yes, they are endangered. The sea otter populations are threatened. And the reason why is because of that fur. That's one of the biggest reasons why. Now, why do you think that fur might cause them to be endangered? It's kind of a weird thought. Well, since that fur is so good at keeping the sea otters warm, someone thought, that fur might be really good at helping keep me warm too. And so hunters would go after otters and hunt them for their fur so that they could make nice warm coats out of them and stay warm in the winters. However, that wasn't very good for the sea otter numbers, because as they started to go down, their numbers dropped. In 1938, their numbers dropped all the way down to about 50 sea otters, so 50. So not very many sea otters were left. And they've become protected since then. There's the Endangered Species Act that federally protects them. Also the California Endangered Species Act. Also the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972 made sure that no one could take or kill or use any items coming from not just a sea otter, but any marine mammal. And so with that protection, the sea otter numbers have started to go up. It's been very, very slow, but I'm happy to report that now their numbers are around 3,000. So now we have about 3,000 animals. That's still not a whole lot, but it's a lot better than 50. So these animals were nearly hunted to extinction. But we noticed another problem. When their numbers went down, another big problem happened in the ocean, especially in the kelp forests. Now think about what these otters like to eat. They like to eat invertebrates. We mentioned sea stars and crabs and shrimp. But another one we mentioned was the sea urchin. Now sea urchins, if they're being eaten by otters, no problem. But if the numbers of the otters go down, then that causes the sea urchins to go up. Their populations rise if there aren't any predators around them to eat them. Now, why would that be a problem? They're not so bad, right? Just these little pokeballs. Well, do you know what sea urchins feed on? You see a lot of it in this exhibit here. They feed on kelp. So what was happening is these sea urchins, which are down at the bottom, right? They don't swim. Did you notice they didn't have any fins? They have tube feet. They stick onto rocks. They will actually eat the kelp. And they don't eat it up at the surface. They're eating it down at the bottom. Now, what's going to happen when when urchins come and they eat that kelp? They've got these 5 little teeth on the underside of their body. If they chew off the kelp from where it's attached to the rock, what's going to happen to the kelp? Well, it is going to disappear and it's going to float away. And instead of just being one thing that they're eating, they're also getting rid of an entire habitat because as kelp grows, it often grows close together and creates what they call a kelp forest habitat. So that's what we're looking at right here in our Blue Cavern exhibit is a kelp forest habitat. And so it creates a home for other animals, just like a forest creates a home for animals on land. Or even a rainforest. If you think about the rainforest, as they grow, they create a canopy up on top. Well, the kelp forest also has a canopy. As that kelp grows really quickly and reaches up to get the sunlight, it will start to spread over the surface of the water, blocking out light to animals below, but also creating a nice little shady area for animals to hide in. So animals use it as a source of food. They also use it as a source of protection and their home. And so it really disrupts the whole entire ecosystem when that kelp starts to disappear. And that's exactly what was happening when all the sea otter numbers started going down. The sea urchin numbers went up. That meant the kelp forest, amounts of kelp in the area were disappearing. And look at this example. This is another exhibit we have at the aquarium, but look at how many different animals are living in a kelp forest. So there are many animals relying on that, like I said, for their food and for their shelter and habitat. And if that's gone, then where are these animals going to go? They're going to have to move to another area, or they won't have what they need to survive, and they'll end up dying off. And so having those sea otters around was what we determined actually that they were what we call keystone species. A keystone species is one that is really, really important to that ecosystem and that habitat. And if you remove it, everything else kind of crumbles around it. And so that's what we discovered with the sea otters, that they're really important for the kelp forests. However, it's good news that their numbers are going up, but there are still some threats to the sea otter. So because they are coastal animals, they don't live very, very far off into the open ocean. They tend to stay closer to shore. They're very affected by the things that we do on land that make their way out into the ocean. They're also very susceptible to pathogens, any chemicals that might be draining into the water that could affect not only them, but the food that they could be eating, which they in turn swallow and digest and can hurt them in that way. But they're around the areas where people are. And so as people are influencing and affecting the environment, those otters are being affected by them too. Now, Madison also wants to know how many babies can they have at once? And are babies born on land? That's a great question about sea otters because that is another mammal characteristic. They do give birth to live young. And we said that they live in the ocean and they actually are born in the ocean. So even though they could come out on land, sea otters have the ability to come out and walk on land, they generally don't. They spend most of their time in the ocean and they even give birth. It'd be very rare. Occasionally one has come out. I know up in Monterey there was one that came up onto the rocks and had its baby out of the water, but they're typically born in the water. But this is a risk for a sea otter because when they're born, they can't swim. So it takes about 5 weeks before that sea otter can learn to swim. And so mama otter has to be very careful and watch her baby very carefully and take good care of them by nursing them and giving them milk. So these otters feed on milk because they are baby mammals. So just like any other mammal, they nurse their young. So these baby otters get fed by mom. And then mom has to, when the baby otters start to need more than just milk, she has to do some hunting for them. Well, the good news is, even though they can't swim, that fluffy fur that they have that's trapping all that air all around them actually makes them pretty buoyant. So they'll actually float at the surface of the water. So it's not until they're about 5 weeks old or so that they'll start diving underwater, and maybe even a little bit longer than that, maybe six weeks or so, 10 weeks before they start foraging and looking for their own food all by themselves. And what Mama Otter will do sometimes is she'll wrap them up in seaweed and kelp and kind of tie them off in a location so that she can go and do her shopping, looking for all the food, and then she can come back to her baby otter, and it's right where she left it, and it's not just wandering all over, floating all over the ocean. So kind of like an anchor. They use kelp like an anchor. Another good reason that those kelp forests need to be around to help those sea otters. And they usually have just one baby at a time. It is not, they could have more than one, but it's usually just one. And they only have one until they're ready to have another baby, and then that other one leaves them, and they can have another one. But usually just one baby at a time. And then Jasmine wants to know, how do we know male from female? Well, by just looking at them, you usually can't tell, except males will get to be a little bit bigger. I think they grow to be about 50 pounds, and a female might only grow to be about 40 pounds, something like that. But from the outside, they pretty much look the same. All right. I think that is all the questions that have come in for now. But I just want you to think about the fact that, yes, these are mammals. They live in the ocean. They spend their lives as marine mammals, yet they have some interesting adaptations that help them in this habitat. Even though they're mammals that breathe air, they can hold their breath. They can dive down. We looked at how their hair is helping keep them warm. We talked a lot about that. We know how they can eat using their paws, but how do they move through that marine environment? Did you happen to notice on any of the videos what they look like in their hind parts of their body? Do they have paws at the end too? What do you think would be the easiest for swimming through the water? If you had to spend most of your life in the water, would you want 4 paws, or would you want something else to help you move? Well, the sea otters have something else that helps them move besides just paws in the back. You may have also noticed that they have a big long tail. So they can use their long tail as a rudder to help them as well. That also can help them when they get out on land and when they're walking on land. And they might scoot along. They have a long, slender body. Remember, they're also relatives of river otters. Also, other animals like weasels, badgers, and wolverines, which are animals that are not necessarily known for being, let's watch them swim real quick, not known for being super friendly, but long, skinny bodies. Did you happen to notice at the very end what those back limbs look like? So there is the paws in the front. What do you see about how they're moving? Oh, it's kind of hard to see. Sorry, we don't have the best video footage to share with you on that. But they actually have almost like flippers. So they have webbed feet in the back. Here, we might be able to see when this one comes out of the water. Do you see those feet? Yeah, they can kind of move them forward, but they're flat. They have these flipper-like feet right here to help push them through the water. And did you notice that they looked kind of like this as they were swimming? So they get through the water very easily with that long, skinny body that they have, and they have those flippers to help them in that watery world and watery environment. All right, well, let's take another look at this otter, because you can see those front feet there. You can actually see pretty well. They have those flippers there in the back and that long tail that we were talking about. Sometimes people ask about these things that are sticking out on the side. Now, in this picture, it's pretty clear. You could probably guess that these are their ears. So yes, they do have ears that stick out on the side. Other times you might be looking at an otter. I know we had someone who was very curious when they visited. They said, what are the horns coming out of the head of the sea otter? I didn't know that otters had horns. And in some situations, how they might be holding their head, it might look like those are little tiny horns coming out of their head, but those are just their ears that they use for hearing. But again, something else that contributes to how cute they are. A couple other things about these animals. If you are referring to a big group of them, otters are social animals, and they will hang out in the same area where there are other otters, and they can form what we call rafts of otters that can be anywhere from 12 to 100 animals, all kind of in the same place. And they are known for kind of keeping their flippers sometimes next to each other. They'll kind of intertwine those back flippers to help them keep in place and be connected and stay together and not wander off anywhere. Also, another thing that I learned that I thought was interesting is that they will help each other out if they sense that there's danger somewhere. So if they see that there's a threat, like maybe a predator such as an orca or a shark might be around, they've been known to maybe raise a paw like that as an indication to the other otters to let them know that, hey, we might need to pay careful attention to what's going on around us right now for our own safety. Also, one last question. Madison says, asks, how long does it take mom to get food for the babies? Oh, actually, Madison, that's a good question. It could vary a lot depending on what food is available. So how far the otter would have to swim, it might take only a 1.5-minute dive. It might take a few times, or maybe they go down to try to get their food and they can't get it off the bottom and they have to go back and try it again, or maybe find a better tool to go grab that. Another type of animal we didn't talk about that they do like to eat are abalone. Now, abalone are a very good nutritious animal for sea otters to eat. However, due to lots of different things, the sea abalone numbers have gone down along our coast too, which meant that otters kind of had to switch to different types of food to eat. But a lot of their time is spent eating. And these animals right here, so these are funny looking shelled things, but underneath these shells, they're a type of a snail. And you can see that foot kind of right here. So this big black foot on the bottom. And here's another, this is a white abalone. It's got these little white tentacles sticking out around the outside edge. Those can hang onto the rocks really, really good. And you do definitely need another rock or another tool to help get these off. So if a sea otter can get one of these, it's a great meal, very nutritious and very filling for a sea otter. But if there aren't a lot of these around, that means they have to do even more foraging and even more looking for food to fill their necessary requirements for their bodies. Otters have a very high metabolism and they eat a lot of food. They can eat up to 25% of their weight every single day, which would be like you figuring out how many pounds you are and eating that many quarter pounders every single day. Or think if you weigh 100 pounds, then you would have to eat 25 pounds worth of food every single day. That's a lot of food. So most of their time is spent foraging, but also cleaning, and they take rest. And I learned that they take about 2 to 4 hour naps in the middle of the day. Doesn't that sound nice? It's just about time for one of those now. Well, thank you for joining us today. I hope you feel like you learned more about these interesting animals, and there are things that we can be doing to help them. In fact, there are groups that are helping these animals. Like I mentioned, our otters here at the aquarium were all rescued animals, and that's something that people are doing when these otters are found abandoned or orphaned to try to keep their populations up. They try to help them, and they'll even use trained otters. Like even one that we have here, Millie, is a very good mother. And so they'll use other otters to help mother and be what they call a surrogate mother for these little babies in hopes that they can release them back out into the ocean. And so that's an exciting thing that has been very successful and has been contributing to that rise in numbers of the sea otters. So we hope that one day they will be able to be taken off that endangered species list and not be listed as threatened anymore. But it will take a little bit of time for that to happen. Their numbers need to be above 3,090, I think, for 3 years in a row before that happens. But anyhow, the future is bright for these little guys. We just need to make sure that we're taking good care of their habitat and keeping a nice environment for them to live in. And they, in turn, will return the favor by keeping our oceans healthy and providing places for food, even fish that we eat. But thanks again for joining us today. If you have any other questions, you're welcome to text us. You can contact us by email when that's up and working for us at live@lbaop.org. And we hope that one day you'll be able to visit us when we can open our doors and you can come in and see these animals for yourselves. Thanks again for joining us today, everyone. Bye.